I'd like to thank you for being with us today, this morning. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote, Dr. Matthias Nückles, to you. Professor Nückles is an educational psychologist and full professor of educational science at the University of Freiburg in Germany. He received his PhD in psychology and sociology from the University of Münster in 2001. He has been a postdoc researcher in educational psychology at the Institute of Psychology at the University of Freiburg till 2006, an associate professor of educational psychology at the Institute of Psychology at the University of Göttingen, and a full professor of educational science at the Institute of Educational Science at the University of Freiburg since 2009. In his research, Professor Nückles investigates how students' self-regulated learning can be effectively supported. He further seeks to improve our understanding of successful teaching in order to create learning environments that support prospective students in the development of their teaching abilities. With these goals in mind, Matthias Nückles regards a thorough analysis of the cognitive and motivational processes underlying learning and teaching, as well as a combination of different research methodologies, ranging from experiments, thinking aloud studies, longitudinal studies, as fundamental for his research. His research is interdisciplinary because he tries to integrate ideas from educational, social, and cognitive psychology, as well as from the philosophy of science. Also, he appreciates collaboration with researchers from mathematics, science, history, and literature education. Currently, Matthias is interested in the following research questions. How can students' cognitive and motivational learning processes, as well as their learning outcomes, be increased through the writing of learning journals? How should learning be explaining be instructionally supported in order to become an effective learning method? Third, how can teacher students be instructionally supported in acquiring didactic reasoning skills that enable them to successfully tackle ill-defined and complex teaching problems? And fourth, how should teacher trainings be designed in order to promote the acquisition of core practices in learning? So Matthias Nückles teaches lectures and courses on current issues in educational psychology and instructional design. Currently, he serves as Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Freiburg, and he is member of the Executive Board of the German Psychological Society. His work has been extensively published, including publications in journals like Educational Psychology Review, Journal of Educational Psychology, Journal of Experimental Psychology, and Learning and Instruction. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker.
Thank you very much, Eleftheria, for your very kind introduction. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I was a doctoral student about 25 years ago, I had regular meetings with my supervisor, Rainer Bromme at that time, and I also had to present at the doctoral students colloquium regularly. And after these meetings, I developed the habit to sit down and write a little bit of what feedback I've got and what people had said in my work. And writing down these protocols helped me to become clear about my own ideas, my thoughts. It also helped me to develop my ideas further. I found this very productive. And writing these learning logs or learning journal entries helped me to externalize my initially rather vague ideas, and reading and revising what I had written helped me to become clear about my thoughts and to make them more concise and to develop them further. And always I found I got new ideas, so it was also a bit, it was creative. And having these experiences made me convinced that it would be a good idea to teach journal writing to higher education students, but also to students at schools. But it wasn't unless I met Alexander Renkel about 20 years ago and started to work with him that he encouraged me to investigate journal writing systematically, and so we started to do research on journal writing together. That's my agenda. I would first like to present you some classical ideas on writing to learn, how writing contributes to learning. Then I will introduce you a new view, theoretical view, the self-regulation view, and with journal writing as the main writing task. And I will describe what are the main theoretical assumptions underlying this view, and I also will sketch out some instructional support methods for self-regulated learning by journal writing, which we have developed under this view. And then this leads to our research program on the Freiburg self-regulated journal writing approach. We call it Freiburg self-regulated journal writing approach because most of the people who have contributed to this program are still or have been once at the University of Freiburg. Some of them are now, for example, in Bielefeld or in Erfurt or in Bochum. And I will tell you more about that research program, show you evidence for the support principles we have developed, and I also then will proceed to more recent developments. Journal writing as preparation for future problem solving in teacher education. I became interested in that topic because I'm also a teacher educator and find this being a very important task for a professor of educational science or educational psychology. And then I will proceed to the idea of spoken instead of written learning journals, because that's quite a new idea we had, and then I come to summary, limitations, and future directions. Theoretical ideas on how writing can contribute to learning originate from research in the early 70s of the last century, so that's quite old ideas. So they came up with the advent of a scientific writing pedagogy, and I think they started in Great Britain with writing across the curriculum movement at that time. And there are two, I would say, two important views in writing to learn. The first one is the so-called romantic view. That was not my idea to call it romantic view, that was David Galbraith's idea to coin it like this. And I think it's a very powerful metaphor, powerful idea, because the underlying assumption is that a great deal of our knowledge we have stored in long-term memory is tacit, it is not directly accessible to us. And so it's like an iceberg underwater, and only there are a little bit lurking over the water surface into working memory. And it is through articulating what we know that more and more of this knowledge becomes explicit. This is the idea of, or the assumption of, by James Britton, shaping at the point of utterance. If you want to find out what we know and what our ideas on subject matter are, we have to articulate them, and then they become evident and explicit to us. And every time when, for example, when I have to prepare a presentation or I have to prepare a lecture, I often make the experience that I say to myself, oh, I don't know very much about these topics, it's really difficult for me. And then I sit down and I write the first idea or sentence on a sheet of paper, or not on a sheet of paper, on a computer keyboard. And then suddenly I discover, oh, I know quite a lot. And in the end, I have a very long presentation like today, which you will find probably too long in the end. So that's the idea which is underlying this idea of this assumption of shaping at the point of utterance. David Galbraith called it the romantic view because learning is supposed to emerge from spontaneous expressive writing. Therefore it is romantic, like works in music by Frédéric Chopin, for example, where the classic form of Vienna music was broken up and became very expressive and creative. The opposite view is the so-called classic view, following Lord Braith. That view is based on the idea of writing as problem solving. A writer tries to solve a complex, ill-defined problem. That was the conception of writing by Hayes and Flower in the 80s. And Skeltermedia and the writer built on that work and said, well, a writer wants to solve a rhetorical problem, and that requires moving between two spaces, a so-called content space and a rhetorical space. You know, I'm struggling with the presenter. Yes, now I have it. Sorry. For example, a writer wants to convince readers of a position, and then the writer, there's the rhetorical goal and the rhetorical problem space. The writer resorts to the content space and asks herself, which elements make up my claim? And then he has, or she has some ideas, goes back to the rhetorical space, asks herself, what metaphor or epitome or narrative or story may illustrate my claim, and then writer works out the metaphor, and then she discovers, well, I need some data to support my claim. What data could I use? So she's back in the semantic space, and then what role could I use to justify my claim? And then she goes back, how can I to the rhetorical space and tries to work it out, and how can I present the data and warrant optimally? That's the dialectical movement between rhetorical and content space. And in doing this, enacting this dialectical movement, Skeltermedia, the writer, said that this produces learning because the knowledge the writer has is transformed through this movement between rhetorical and and content space. And that's the classic view of writing due to the central role of the rhetorical form. That's the idea. And both views, the romantic and the classic views, make quite distinct assumptions. You know, following the romantic view, writing emanates just from beginning to write, just engaging in the activity of writing. And the classic view says, well, the writer has to solve a rhetorical problem, and the instantiation of a rhetorical form is important to induce knowledge transforming. And both these assumptions, of course, are questionable, because it can be questioned whether unguided writing really produces any learning gains. The experience with my students was, when I gave them writing tasks, they did it mostly in a quite minimalistic way, or brief summaries of few words, and that did not produce any significant learning gains. On the other hand, instantiating a genre, a rhetorical form, naturally imposes high cognitive load on the writer and may overtax novice writer. Everyone who's ever supervised a bachelor or master's thesis knows how challenging it is for students to write a good, well-written journal, manuscript or thesis, or even perhaps a journal article. It's very demanding for everyone who starts writing in doing a degree. So I think it's not likely that such rhetorical writing may actually produce learning, because there is much cognitive load invested in instantiating the rhetorical form. And if you look at meta-analysis of tool-based writing intervention, writing to learn tasks, there was an older one by Bangard-Rounds and colleagues, and a quite recent one by Steve Graham and colleagues. And the effect sizes are not very encouraging. Hedges 3 is a weighted hedges G of 0.30 in the recent meta-analysis. It's rather a small effect. So this is weak evidence both for the romantic and the classic view. But in both meta-analysis there was also another finding, namely that writing tasks comprised metacognitive prompts produced significantly larger effect. There was also always a moderator which was significant and raised effect size to 0.26, weighted Cohen's d, and also weighted Hedges g of 2.40 in Graham's meta-analysis. So the effect of writing on learning may perhaps depend on the scaffolding it produces, the scaffolding it offers for self-regulating learning processes. And so we made the conclusion that combining, that engaging students in writing tasks that induce them or encourage them to use cognitive and metacognitive strategies, especially a combination of both, might be perhaps really fruitful and beneficial to self-regulated learning. So that leads me to the self-regulation view in writing to learn, and in the self-regulation view in writing to learn, of course, we adopted journal writing as the main writing task, learning journal. Learners write down their thoughts about previously presented learning content. They ask themselves what they do understand or do not understand, what can be done to close these gaps in understanding. And we considered journal writing as a self-regulated follow-up coursework task, so doing independent self-guided homework or follow-up coursework. In line with the romantic view, it's a self-determined way, really self-determined way of developing ideas about subject matter. And in contrast to the classic view, there is no need to follow a certain rhetorical structure. And in the self-regulation view in writing to learn, it is one of our main contention that students need instructional support for anything cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies, because students are often sometimes a bit cognitive misers, so they try to minimize mental effort, and sometimes they need instructional support. I give you an example of such a journal writing entry. It's quite an authentic one. I amended it a bit for presentation purposes, and it is written by a 7th grade biology student in one of the studies I did. And it's about immunology. Oh, sorry, my English is not good. You know, that's kind of organization strategy, what the students is doing here. He tries to identify main points, then he brings and he works out a small example on non-specific defense. The skin protects the organism against chemical and physical influences. I'm afraid I will give you to read some passages of such journal entries during this presentation, because it's on writing and so you always have to read. Then there's another organization strategy. This makes the student make a distinction between different helper cells. And then there's a monitoring episode. Students articulate what she does not understand and make some plans of how to overcome this comprehension difficulty. So you have an idea what the journal writing, how it concretely looks like. And I move to theoretical assumptions underlying the self-regulation view. As sketched out, writing requires externalizing one's thoughts. And that's a good idea, or that's a good affordance of writing, because that brings with it cognitive offloading of working memory. You know, if you have to work out all your ideas and your thoughts in working memory, that's high intrinsic load, and by externalizing the ideas, you can read them, and this is offloading, and that makes resources free for self-regulation and reflection on the content. And these externalized thoughts, as David Galbraith could show, stimulate and guide idea generation. You know, you read what you've written, and that primes other concepts in your long-term memory. It brings you new ideas, and that can unfold in a very nice interplay between what has been written and what is read, and that produces idea generation. The second theoretical assumption is the genre-free principle, as sketched out in the discussion of theoretical views. So, in journal writing, in our way of journal writing, learners do not have to meet rhetorical standards. So a learning journal can be a very idiosyncratic text a learner produces. There's no need to produce a well-shaped, well-formed text, but it may look very idiosyncratic, but still beneficial to the learner because the learner engages in useful cognitive and metacognitive strategies. And the genre-free principle also has the advantage of cognitive offloading, because there is no need to focus attention on rhetorical aspects. And as you may see or may infer, genre-free principle, we coined this principle in analogy to John Sweller's goal-free effect, because there is some similarity, or I think it's maybe the same. The goal-free effect may be instantiated in this genre-free principle, because learners don't have to solve a problem to find a solution, but they can concentrate on their ideas, on the subject matter, on the content. The third principle is self-regulated learning by journal needs to be supported, because learners are cognitive misers. I'm deeply convinced that learners are cognitive misers, that they want to keep mental effort at a minimum if possible. And the second reason is for support that learners, for example younger learners, school students are often not familiar with self-regulated learning strategies in journal writing. So that's a good reason to provide support. These are the theoretical assumptions. And now the question is, what type of cognitive and metacognitive strategies should be instructionally supported in journal writing? Here, we have developed a model of self-regulated learning that's inspired by Barry Zimmerman's work, but also, or equally, by Richard Mayer's and Claire Weinstein's work on learning strategy research. Well, it is a kind of fusion of Zimmerman's model and the Zoe model, so to say, if you want. You know, at the heart of meaningful learning are organization and elaboration strategies, organization, identifying main points, identifying, constructing relation between concepts and principles. Elaboration means trying to illustrate an abstract concept to be learned by an own example, or developing an own position, a critical argument against the theory. These are the knowledge construction processes, and in doing so, students monitor their students create, construct knowledge, understanding, and in doing so, they monitor their comprehension, their understanding, and may find comprehension gaps, and finding comprehension gaps may lead them to the planning of remedial strategies. What can we do to overcome the impasses of my understanding? And in doing so, they engage in remedial cognitive strategies. And so, this is Zimmerman's idea that there is a cyclical and interactive process, so that one learning episode naturally seeks into another episode, or one learning process initiates an adjacent learning process, and so on, unless students are supposed to engage in such a cyclic and interactive process unless they have a sufficient understanding reached. We developed several instructional support processes, support methods for self-regulated learning by journal writing. The easiest method is just prompting, cognitive and metacognitive strategies. So we conceive of prompts as strategy activators. We assume that the learners are already knowledgeable about the strategies, and generally they are able to enact the strategies, but they are not motivated to do so, or they are not aware that in a certain learning situation it would be useful to enact the strategy, so they need some prompts, some nudges to do it. And that may help learners overcome production deficiencies. So they are in principle capable of, but they don't show them. So you should help them, encourage them to show them. The second support principle is having learners self-explain worked examples of journal entries in preparation to journal writing, because worked examples of learning journal entries function as a modeling of the strategies in journal writing, and that might help learners to develop a concrete image of how to execute the strategies in the journal writing, because for learners unfamiliar with the journal writing, they often ask the instructor, so what type of text am I supposed to write? I've never done this. That's very unfamiliar to me, and so showing them a worked example is a good idea, or might be a good idea. A third principle, a support method, is providing learners with metacognitive information about strategies, informing learners about how, when and why to use specific strategies, very old principle, and so learners in that support method are taught on the meta level to effectively exploit the journal writing as a learning opportunity. There's also a fourth principle, because when learners get proficient in the journal writing, instructional support should be faded out adaptively in line with the learner's growing strategic expertise. We've done also studies on this principle, on this support method, and we could show that indeed if the same support, the same prompts are given over a longer period of time, learners become reluctant to these prompts, and they experience it as a kind of external, redundant guidance, because they find their own way of how to do the journal writing. So it was a good idea to fade it out adaptively, to avoid over-prompting effects. But I won't deepen this principle because of time reasons. In preparation to this presentation, I have prepared mini meta-analysis on the part of our experimental studies, where we had where we contrasted unsupported journal writing with supported journal writing, and Anja Prinz, a colleague of mine, helped me in doing this meta-analysis, and I think it's quite encouraging. Because, you know, there's only one outlier, that is Florian, my doctoral student.
You should fire him.
Yes, but he's very nice. And has produced nice data, I will show later. But except Florian's experiment, the effect sizes of the other experiments are quite reasonable, you know. And they're quite different domains. Content domain, psychology, and geography, and history, so also teacher education and studies with school students. And we got a Hedges G of 0.87. That's the unweighted Hedges G. For example, a recent meta-analysis on the worked example effect has been published in Educational Psychology Review, and the Hedges, average Hedges G was 0.48, and with the journal writing we have 0.87, almost double the effect size. So that's quite nice. But of course there are only nine studies, so I'm aware of the limitations of this interpretation. I would like to give you some ideas on the research program. Currently we have conducted 20 experimental and cooperative studies, published in 16 papers. Main question is, how can self-regulated learning by journal writing be optimally supported? And we are interested in the effect of the support methods on strategy use in the learning journal and on learning outcomes, so comprehension and retention. This is a typical setting of a laboratory experiment on journal writing, how we did it and do it. Procedure: students are given a pretest on the content domain, then they are presented a lecture on the content to be learned, then they get different types of instructional support, either prompts or prompts plus worked examples of journal entries. Then they write one or several learning journal entries. Usually they are given ample time to produce the text. For example, in learning by explaining research, Students typically have 8 minutes to prepare an explanation, an oral or written explanation, so there's not much time. In our studies, we give students ample time because it's also complex content, to produce the journal entries, often producing an initial draft and then giving additional time for doing a revision, because the revision phase is supposed to be especially productive. Then there is a post-test, usually with open-ended questions, so no multiple choice questions. Open-ended questions that tap into comprehension and principles and conceptual knowledge, and then usually we have a delayed post-test, often not like a retrieval practice research with a delay of several weeks, but usually with a delay of 1 week. That's the typical experimental design. And how do we measure learning strategies in learning journals? Often we code the strategies as linguistic events, sometimes with prior segmentation into idea units. That's quite demanding work. So many people doing this. We haven't yet automized it. We are working on it, but it's still done by hand. And this is an example from Inga Glogger's paper and PhD thesis. She worked very nicely out the coding system. That's a learning journal entry extract on math content, probability, and there's a visual organization where a student highlights and underlines. Then there's an elaboration. These are the linguistic events. There's another elaborate explanation of the example, and there is a monitoring statement, and that way we code the learning journal entries, and usually it's quite easy to train coders and to get quite high and satisfying kappas. Another more economic way to analyze the journal entries is using high inferential ratings. I will show you later some results on this. Organization is the ability to recognize and articulate relationships. Please assess the extent, so the quantity to which the learner has identified connections within the learning material, articulates them, and also with these high inferential ratings we easily receive quite intra-class coefficients. And finally, the idea is to analyze whether the learning strategies elicited in the journals indeed mediate comprehension and long-term retention. And so we usually conduct mediation analysis, and I will show you 2 of them later on. Now I'm prepared, or you are prepared, for being shown some evidence from, I would say, for us they are classic experimental studies because they are so old, and because the newer ones build on the older ones, and therefore they are for us, they are classic. And the first one is on prompting, cognitive and metacognitive strategies in journal writing. And in these experiments we are very interested in the questions, what would be the best combination of cognitive and metacognitive prompts? How should you combine cognitive and metacognitive prompts so that learning outcomes are highest? That was the underlying research question. We developed some prompts. Here they are. It was Kirsten Berthold who initially developed these prompts that are supposed to trigger the learning strategies. That was a research question, and this was the first experimental study we published on this topic. And 84 students, I think they were students of psychology, watched the videotape lecture. Afterwards they wrote a journal entry, then they took a comprehension test. 1 week later they took the same test. We had 4 prompting conditions, a no prompts condition, then a group with 6 cognitive prompts, organization, elaboration, a group with 6 metacognitive prompts, monitoring and planning of remedial strategy, and a combined group with 3 cognitive and 3 metacognitive prompts. And as you can see, the prompts work very nicely because students, when they were prompted to elicit cognitive strategy, they did it to a high extent. It's interesting that also the cognitive prompts condition was stimulated, also engaged in some metacognitive processes compared to the control condition. That was also significant. The metacognitive prompts condition elicited a high amount of metacognitive strategies, and the cognitive and the combined condition was a bit in between. So the prompts worked very well with these first-year university students. And these were the results on the comprehension tests. Almost no decay between comprehension immediate test and delay test. And as you can see, the cognitive prompt condition was superior to the no prompt condition, and the combined condition outperformed also the no prompt condition. But the metacognitive prompt condition was no better than the control condition. So when I presented that first at EARLI in 2003, there was an American professor of psychology who stood up and said, well, you have very convincing evidence that metacognition is rubbish. I really liked that statement, and it became part of me. And for the rest of my life, I will stay skeptical against metacognition. But, well, there are two alternative explanations for this result. One is that, indeed, metacognitive strategies only work and contribute to learning if combined with cognitive strategies. But, on the other hand, in that experimental setting, the students were shown that lecture, then the lecture was over, then they had to do the journal writing, they had no access to the lecture anymore, and so if they engaged in metacognitive monitoring, found a comprehension difficulty, it was very difficult for them to close this gap in understanding, because they had to do it just by engaging in retrieval. And that's very hard to do. And so it may be because the students didn't have enough opportunity to engage in a remedial strategy, the metacognitive prompt condition wasn't successful. So that's the alternative explanation. This result and these theoretical arguments inspired me to do a follow-up study. And then I had the idea to give the students the opportunity to revise the journal entry, the initial journal entry they had written from memory. And we did a quite similar experimental study. The only difference was that in this study, the students got the opportunity to revise their first draft using the text. We provided them the text, the written text on which the video had been based. And then they took the comprehension test, and then 1 week later the delay test. And if providing students the opportunity to revise in an open book condition, open book setting, their journal entry, if this helps them to realize remedial strategies, then the metacognitive prompts condition with planning of remedial strategies should be better than the no prompts condition. It should perform about equally than the cognitive prompts condition. And that was the critical contrast to test this hypothesis. We had another hypothesis, because we were interested whether just providing students the opportunity would suffice in stimulating, engaging in remedial strategy, or whether, if providing them with prompts for planning of remedial strategy, if this effect could be boosted. So if encouraging, stimulating all types of cognitive and metacognitive processes would yield the highest learning outcome. That was the second hypothesis what we had. And these are the results, and as you can see, indeed, the metacognitive had nice effect sizes, and the contrast between the metacognitive prompts group and the no prompts group was significant. And as predicted, the group which had all sorts of prompts, the mixed prompts group with planning of remedial strategies, yielded the highest learning outcomes, and also quite impressive, about 1.5 points on a 6-point rating scale, so was quite a nice effect. So, which combination of prompts support self-regulating learning best? All essential sub-processes should be prompted, involved in self-regulated learning, and combining cognitive and metacognitive prompts seems to be indeed a powerful learning strategy. Inga Jogger also found in her field study that learners who applied both cognitive and metacognitive strategies were most successful. And Julian Röhle, who is interested in sequencing questions, yesterday he presented the study where he sequenced generative learning and retrieval practice, and in 2017 he was interested whether it would be better to engage in metacognitive strategies first, followed by cognitive strategies, or vice versa. And Julian found that learners in metacognitive first conditions outperformed their counterparts regarding the quality of enacting cognitive and metacognitive strategies as well as in learning outcomes. Quite interesting result too. Now, evidence for the second and third support principle, worked examples, and providing metacognitive information. As said, well, the worked example effect is a classical effect in cognitive load theory, although the average effect size is lower than I ever thought. And I think the main idea is that it is especially useful for learners who are not familiar with the strategies and the journal writing. So, providing a journal entry, exemplary journal entry, helps them to develop a concrete image of how to execute the strategy. And it's important to know that a worked example of a learning journal entry is a worked example in a non-algorithmic domain, so that's a kind of heuristic example, you know. There is no way how to do it best. There are numerous possible ways, and so it is one opportunity or one way, one example on how students could do it, but it may be, because it is very concrete and very clear, it may stimulate students to engage in the strategies which are supposed to enact in the journal writing. So these were the research questions, whether the journal and work example, the learning journal example would help them to better react to the prompts, to engage more thoroughly in the strategies, and also we are interested in the effects of learning outcomes. This is an extract of the worked example journal entry which we gave the student. It was on physics, and afterwards the learning was on psychology, so quite a long far transfer distance from physics to psychology topic. And these are the prompts they got. And we asked the students to assign passages of the journal entry to the prompts. So there was a kind of self-explanation instruction embedded in studying this journal entry. And second manipulation was providing learners with metacognitive information on the value and conditions of application. And this was a design, a 2x2 design, with metacognitive information or without, with learning journal example or without. And these were 11th grade students from German secondary schools, from German high schools, 70 years old. That was the procedure. So this was a transfer design now. First there was a training session to pre-test, then was the experimental manipulation, then the videotape lecture on social pressure, then writing a learning journal, then comprehension test. 7 days later, same procedure, videotape lecture on a different topic, destructive obedience was the topic, then writing a learning journal, and then the comprehension test. And these are the results. As you can see, indeed, the worked example, the learning journal example, strongly stimulated the students to engage in elaboration strategies. I exemplify these results with the elaboration strategies. So they did really hard on eliciting these strategies, also in the transfer session. So he had large effect sizes where there was no effect on strategy use of the informed prompting, on the metacognitive information, on the quantity of strategies. But then we look at the learning outcomes. We see that the informed prompting had an effect on learning outcomes, both in the training session and in the transfer session, the weaker in the transfer session. And the worked example had only an effect on learning outcomes, but a large effect in the transfer session. I think that's quite an interesting result. Because, why is it interesting? Because the modeling of the strategies was very successful in the training session, but apparently the learners needed some practice before the effects on learning outcomes were turned up and became apparent. So we interpreted this pattern of results as evidence of a utilization inefficiencies. The learners were unfamiliar with engaging in the strategies. They were shown an example. They worked hard on eliciting these strategies, concentrated all their attention on strategy use, and that didn't leave any attention resources to understand the content, or less attention resources on understanding the content. And when they had enough practice with the strategies, 1 week later they could then benefit in terms of learning outcomes. So the modeling of strategies and provision of metacognitive information are effective support methods for improving self-regulated learning by journal writing. Now I come to the recent developments, but before I will have a little bit of water. No, it's fine. It's okay. Well, as I'm also a teacher educator, I got interested whether the journal writing could be useful in teacher education. And when students want to become a teacher, they are faced with really great challenges because they have to learn different domains of professional knowledge. You know, that's a classical distinction by Schulman and Hilda Borkum and Ralph Putnam, that teacher students have to acquire a lot of content knowledge, and teacher education mainly focuses on content knowledge, you know, knowledge about principles, domain principles and concepts and facts, making up subject matter. But they also have to engage in pedagogical knowledge, in knowledge about instructional design approaches, and knowledge about the nature of teaching and learning, and have to engage in pedagogical content knowledge, so domain-specific learning processes and instructional strategies and learners' preconceptions, for example. These are 3 domains, and it's really challenging for students to create coherence, to make sense of these huge stocks of knowledge. So that's really high intrinsic cognitive load to integrate and to make coherent these complex stocks of knowledge. And the things are made worse by the structure of our teacher education programs. I think it is in Germany, it is like this. In other countries, it's probably a bit similar, because the domains are typically taught in our country in separate courses. So the history professors don't talk with the education professors, and the math application professor doesn't talk with the educational scientists, and so they all do their stuff and teach their courses, and the students have to integrate these stocks of knowledge by themselves in a self-regulated manner, and that produces high extraneous cognitive load. And so I thought using journal writing might be a good idea to facilitate pre-service teachers' self-regulated creation of coherence in dealing with these domains of professional knowledge, because it offers the cognitive offloading from working memory, and it has the goal-free nature of journal writing, the genre-free principle, and both features should facilitate organization and elaboration of information from multiple knowledge domains. So I became interested how should the journal writing be supported to effectively help pre-service teachers construct applicable knowledge for teaching from the three knowledge domains. And we created a multiple documents comprehension task, because when pre-service teachers start planning lessons and prepare for teaching, you usually sit at their desk, have different texts available, content knowledge text on volcanism, for example, pedagogical text about features of effective visualization, and a pedagogical content knowledge text on students' preconception about volcanism. And so the students sit there and try to work out a lesson plan, and that would be problem solving. And I thought, refrain them from planning the lesson, but have them journal write and have them develop freely their ideas, how these texts make sense to them and could be related, would be a good idea. So we tried to create this situation as a goal-free situation. They were only told, imagine that you have to discuss your ideas for a lesson with your supervisor, and as preparation, please carefully read these texts and write down your ideas, how these texts could be helpful for lesson planning in journal writing. Completely free how to develop your ideas and try to organize these texts. That was the design. We had geography pre-service teachers, 74 in 3 conditions factorial design. We had a no prompt condition, unsupported journal writing. We had a prompt only condition and a prompt plus learning journal example condition. And we developed specific prompts for this multiple comprehension paradigm to encourage integration and organization information from the 3 texts. So we called them coherence creating strategy prompts. And these are the prompts we gave them. So they are designed to help creating coherence among the 3 texts. And this is an extract of the learning journal example which we created for the geography teacher students. It's based on the processes of rock formation. That was the topic. And then the PCK, the pedagogical content knowledge text, was on students' preconceptions on rock formation, and general pedagogical text was on design of instructional text. That was an illustration of an organizational strategies. What are the main texts the main aspects of the 3 texts in your opinion? Monitoring, which connections are easy to establish. Elaboration, which only experienced examples can you think of that illustrate these connections. And it was quite a long, about a 2-page worked example of such a reflection and exemplary journal entry. The teacher students were given to read and also to self-explain, like in the Hübner et al. Study from 2010. So self-explanation was also an important component of this instructional support. And these are sample teaching tasks. We didn't have them in those studies, we didn't have them plan a lesson, but we used a more economic outcome measure. We gave them pairs of contrasting cases of visualizations and asked them to evaluate the instructional appropriateness of these visualizations, how good they are with regard to pedagogical knowledge, content knowledge, and pedagogical content. What are the 3 knowledge domains? For example, the pictures show different types of volcano. That would be content knowledge statements and their correct eruption type. The integrated format facilitates the learning process, which would be an idea from the PK test. And the visualization is helpful to clear up the preconception that magma originates from the core of the Earth. That's a typical preconception of students in that domain. And students were supposed to, in their evaluations, to write such statements like these. This is a contrasting case of this pair about volcanoes, and you know, that's less than optimal in certain aspects as were presented in these texts. So, same studies designed as in Hübner and in colleagues from 2010. We had a training session and we had a transfer session, 120 minutes and 100 minutes in the transfer session, pre-test on volcano preconceptions and so on, introduction to journal writing, rock reading, then rock formation, preconception about rock formation, design of instructional text, then follow the experimental manipulation, writing a journal entry without support, writing a journal entry with prompts, self-explaining a journal entry in an open book, this time in an open book fashion. And the application task was, as said, evaluation of, here it was in the training session, evaluation of instructional text, and in the transfer session it was evaluation of 3 pairs of instructional visualizations in volcanism. And these are the results. We analyzed the journal entries and application tasks of the transfer session because we were interested whether the students would be able to take ideas from the text they had read before the journal writing to solve these application tasks by in writing the evaluation statements. So in how far would they be able to use scientific information they had read and had tried to understand for solving these application tasks. And we counted the number of high-quality coherence rating strategies in the journal entries, and as you see, the worked example was very successful, and also the prompt condition was, the prompts condition was better than the control condition, so we had a large effect sizes, and we could show that the coherence rating strategies mediated the effect of instructional support on number of statements taken from the text for solving the application task, and it was a full mediation because the direct effect was non-significant. So that's quite strong support for this approach, and we did a conceptual replication study. I was interested in whether the effect of the journal writing, of the worked example on the journal writing could be boosted, and we found the same pattern, that number of coherence rating strategies were better in the example plus prompts condition. They didn't produce, like in the previous study, use more scientific statements for solving the tasks in the example plus prompts condition compared to the prompts condition, but this time we had a quality rating, how good were the evaluations, how good did the students solve the application task. And in both transfer sessions, here we had 2 transfer sessions after the training session, so a longitudinal design. We had a higher quality of the solutions of the example plus prompts condition compared to the prompts condition. So the supported journal writing strongly promoted pre-service teachers' enactment of coherence rating strategies, and it was highly effective to help the teacher students to use scientific ideas for solving the task, and the strategies indeed mediated the use of scientific ideas from the text. So the instructional supported journal writing is a powerful method for promoting self-regulated coherence construction in teacher education, and it's a powerful method, and I think that's also the wider impact or implication of this study, that it is a good method for promoting evidence-based didactic reasoning, and this is in teacher education research that is currently a hot topic, as can be seen in the publication by Ingo Koller and colleagues. So I come to the second recent development before closing, and the second recent development is the idea of spoken learning journals. because in doing these studies on the journal writing, we also had experienced some limitations. One limitation is that we observed that using writing as a way of freely expressing thoughts is difficult for many students, and also the motivation for the journal writing decreases over time. And reasons may be that writing produces relatively high production costs, or has high production costs. Writing on a keyboard, on a sheet of paper, is harder than speaking because of the mechanics of writing. So writing tasks as such take considerable effort, and there are higher formulation costs. Students struggle with the genre-free principle. They want to produce perfect text, write well-shaped, orthographically and rhetorically well-shaped text sentences, and that makes it hard for them. And a solution might be having learners not to write, but to speak, learning journal entries. I was inspired to try this idea and doing experimental research because I read papers by Vincent Hogereiter and Andreas Lachner, and they did research on learning by explaining on video. So I compared oral explanation with written explanations and found relatively inconsistent evidence. But I think the basic idea is very interesting, and so I had the idea of spoken journal writing without an audience, speaking the journal entry for oneself. And I think theoretically that can be justified by the lower production and formulation costs. You know, reviewability is easier to realize, and revisability in written journals, and it is rather limited. Reviewability is also possible when the spoken journals are recorded, like on a mobile device, as we did. But revisability, that's a bit limited. You can only add information. So there are different constraints on affordances of the medium. But our assumption was that lower production and formulation costs facilitate text production and thereby promote application of cognitive and metacognitive strategies. And we had a 2x2 design with an additional control group. So we varied the medium and also the prompts. Student got the best prompt condition we had detected in my former research, and so prompted with and without prompts and without prompts. And we also had a restudy condition where students were allowed to underline, highlight text content. I will leave aside the control condition. It's also interesting, but I will concentrate on the effect of medium and prompts. And these students also were 11th grade students, like in the Hübner and colleagues study from 2010. And the procedure was similar. Students took a pre-test, then they watched the videotape lecture. Afterwards, they produced the first draft. Then they revised or complemented the draft with the text of the lecture available as in open book. Then they took a comprehension test, and 1 week later they took the same test again to measure recall. This is, I think it's useful if you read it. I won't read it for you because I would create a redundancy effect, and that wouldn't be good. That's a typical extract of a spoken learning journal. There are also some misconceptions, and the students get some things wrong, but it's very instructive, I think. Have you already read it? It's very informal language, and false starts, repairs, and the students get confused and get things a bit wrong, but there are also very good ideas, and some, I think he has understood, or she, I don't know whether it was a boy or a girl, has understood the essence of the modality effect. And this is an extract of a written journal entry, and so that's completely different language. So very condensed, concise, brief, and the sentence in blue, this is a revision what the student did. You know, they didn't do much revisions, but this student added one sentence. So it's just an extra, it's not the whole journal, and it's just a portion of it, to give you an idea how the language feels or how the language looked like. And these are the results. So one, perhaps surprisingly or not surprisingly, but impressive effect was that the 11th grade students wrote about 400 words on average. Last night I wrote an email to Sandra Hübner, who did the 2010 study with me, and she said, well, those students also wrote their journal entries on the keyboard at that time, and they produced about three-quarters of a page on average, so same amount. And in the spoken journals, we use tablets, and the students had the opportunity to speak in the tablet for the initial draft, and later they had half an hour with the text of the lecture to revise or to add, to complement their draft, and they used that opportunity very intensely, and they produced almost 4 times the amount of words. So that's quite interesting. And it's even more interesting if you look at the processes, and you see in the spoken condition, students use far more cognitive processes, more elaborations, and also far more metacognitive statements on monitoring and planning of experimental strategies. These are really impressive effect sizes, and interestingly, the prompts didn't really work very well. I always found effects with prompting, but not in this study, so that's Florian's responsibility. We had an effect of metacognitive prompts, at least, but no effect of the cognitive prompts. So 11th grade students, and those students had just been presented prompts, and we had there in the medium, so no word example, no example in learning journal entry. These are the outcomes. We had reliable effects, smaller effect sizes than in former times, but a larger sample and more power. And we had an effect of the spoken in favor of the spoken condition in the immediate test and also in the delayed test. No effects of the prompts, null effects. And these are the mediation analysis. Do learning strategies mediate the effects of medium and prompts on learning outcomes? And we found both for cognitive and metacognitive strategies, mediation effects, and also a complete or full mediation. Kirsten Berthold had only mediation effect of cognitive prompts. Here we have also effect of metacognitive prompts. And metacognitive strategies, not prompts, sorry I'm confused, of the metacognitive strategies afforded or induced by the medium on post-test, same for delayed test, but I leave it out. And we have the prompt effect for the metacognitive strategies, like in the Nückles and colleagues study from 2009, but no total effect. So spoken journals are very effective in facilitating text production and application of strategies. Large effect on both medium, both on text length and strategy use. Both cognitive and metacognitive strategies mediate effect on learning outcomes. Now the question is, are the effects of the oral medium due to lower production costs or to lower formulation costs? We have currently no data to disentangle these different processes. My feeling is, my intuition is, but what is an intuition? But my intuition is that it is the socialization of children in German school that implants high internal standards regarding the rhetorical form. Florian is a German teacher who works at a German high school, and he confirms my intuition. So it's better if 2 people share an intuition, but we will have to do experimental research. So it may be that the race formulation cost when students are asked, write a text, disregard any rhetorical standards, that they still have the internal mindset, the standards, like a rhetorical superego, a Freudian superego concerning rhetoric, which prevents them from using this learning opportunity in an optimal way. And so writing may not per se be the less productive text production medium, but we need further research on this topic. Why no effect of prompts? I think my explanation is that they were 11th grade students and we didn't show them a worked example of a journal entry. Maybe the task was a bit too hard for them, or they didn't know how to use the prompts. You know, the medium triggered the strategies, but not the prompts. And so maybe they didn't know how to use the prompts, and so providing them with an example might be a solution to this problem. Also, providing them with an example and with metacognitive information about learning strategies and the nature of writing and the function of writing might help them overcome their conception of writing as producing well-shaped sentences and develop a mindset of writing as really developing ideas about subject matter. So this is what we are going to do in the future. Come to the summary, limitations and future directions. I've showed you our assumptions and evidence on the self-regulation between writing to learn. I think writing offers unique affordances for self-regulated learning through externalization of thought, through writing as a personal, free and expressive way of developing one thought, and I think make writing a powerful learning tool, a powerful tool for learning. Is needed, it can work if given instructional support is provided. And I showed you our research program on support methods for journal writing. I see the geography principle as a defining feature of the journal writing. And what are the major insights? Guiding learners to invest germane cognitively in all essential sub-processes, combine cognitive and metacognitive strategies that yields the largest outcome. When you have proficient learners, prompting may be sufficient, learners with incomplete metacognitive knowledge, high complexity of content like in teacher education, then provide a learning journal example and metacognitive information about strategies. And the strategies elicited in the journal mediate the learning success. What are limitations? As said, many students have difficulties in implementing the genre-free principle, and so we need to do further research on this topic. I think the study with the spoken journals might be interesting and inspiring also for recent research on learning by explaining, because those guys, Lachner and Hogereiter, they are always thinking about social presence, and I think social presence is not the most important variable here. I think looking at the constraint and affordances of text production, language production, is perhaps key to solving the riddle why sometimes the oral explanations are better than the written explanations, sometimes not. So that might perhaps bringing these two strands of research together might be inspiring and productive. We have a confounding of the generative learning with retrieval practice in some studies, because we had the students produce a first draft from memory and then we gave them opportunity for revision. Disentangling the relative contributions of retrieval practice and generative learning, that is at the core of Julian Rölle's research program, and we are doing research on this, and currently I have a review on that topic under review. And well, to conclude, I think we are living in a time where we have an upsurge of AI tools. Artificial intelligence has been a hype in the early 90s, then it disappeared, and now it is coming back with tremendous implications. And large language models now, like ChatGPT, pose the question, is it still worth to engage in writing if ChatGPT can write for you everything you want? But I think it doesn't relieve us as educators and educational psychologists and instructional designers from the mission to help students become proficient learners and citizens in our society who are able to develop their own thoughts, not to ask ChatGPT what should my opinion be, and ChatGPT gives you an answer which calculates the average probability of what has been published in the internet. But it is important to develop your own thoughts, and if you want to find out what you think about a topic, I think it's a good idea to engage in writing. And I wouldn't be an academic if I wouldn't believe in the power of writing, because that's the basis of our profession, isn't it? Thank you very much for your long attention.
So thank you very much, Professor Nückles, for this wonderful talk. Very interesting, very timely, and actually I think it's a very good example how basic research can be meaningful and highly associated with instructional practice, but also how the applied field can feed back basic research and continue in this very interactive and interesting and useful loop. So thank you very much. Time has passed, but I think we can give, let's say, the opportunity for one or two questions to our teacher. Yes, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for the amazing talk. I'm Haiting from Berlin, Germany, and I do agree with you that writing is powerful for everyone. And my question is about the heterogeneity of students we have now in schools. Like for example, in Germany, we have a huge education gap between students with migration background and without migration background. A big problem is language skills.
Yes.
So did you find some results about students with migration background or insufficient language skills?
Well, actually, I didn't do such research, but I know that you are completely right. A few years ago, I was invited to a symposium at EARLI by Steve Graham, and I was with my small-scale experimental studies, and there were huge programs on fostering writing competence in the US, and the US has ever been a multicultural and immigration society, and they consider fostering writing competence as a key competence. And in Germany, no one really does talk about this. It's always about reading competence, but writing and speech production and acquiring the language is equally important. So I think that's an important topic. And of course, there is a lot of heterogeneity among the students. My eldest son is a teacher and teaches in the middle school, and he has most of his students are very limited language abilities, but still also these students benefit from the journal writing. He did his master thesis on the topic because he's my son, so to do it, and we found nice effect, and the students wrote such a passage, and the elaboration strategies made it a learning success. So it also works with students with limited language capabilities.
Are there some special strategies if you want to especially facilitate these students? Like they may have some.
We'll give them feedback, show them examples. Yeah. I could imagine that the same support procedures work as with the 11th grade high school students. Provide them perhaps more opportunities for studying exams and practice. I think it's quite easy, and prompt them and give them feedback.
Thank you.
I have a question about the application of the spoken versus the written approach in classrooms. So I can see as the role of the teacher would be to read students' journals and look for misconceptions or what needs to be clarified and so on. And I'm wondering if because the spoken versions are longer and not so concise, or potentially well thought out. There may be a quality difference. I can see it being burdensome for teachers to use the spoken approach as opposed to a written approach. I can also see potentially a cost for the spoken versus the written, in the sense that students then do not have to fine-tune or refine.
To what?
To refine
Yes.
their thoughts and so on, and so they may not be learning to write as well either. So could you speak just for a moment about what the potential costs of using the spoken approach might be?
Well, we have one cost which I didn't show you. We have Florian analyzed the revision phases of the spoken journals and written journals, and he found that partly in the revision phase, the students partly added information from the lecture text, which was connected to their previous idea in the previous text, in the first draft. And these ideas boosted learning outcomes tremendously. The effect size doubled if you use it as a covariate. And the students, and they did it particularly in the spoken journal condition, they added just content, what they read, and didn't connect it to what they had spoken or recorded before. And these ideas were a negative mediator of learning success. So that might be a cost and might provoke or might make further support and instruction on the spoken journals necessary. And of course, for the teachers, it is it's always takes a lot of time and is demanding to read the journal entries of students. I do it in my courses, but I have 3 research assistants who put quotes, who produce extracts from the journal entries of my teacher education students, and I have 20 pages, and I read it as preparation for my lecture, and that's highly beneficial because I see what my students think about the stuff I'm talking to them. And in our schools, the teachers don't have these facilities and these resources, so I would recommend from time to time, to have a look in the students' journals. I think the journal writing is effective as such without giving the students feedback. My son did it in his master thesis, providing feedback to the limited ability students, and that helped them. But it was quite, it was not very economical, you can't do it all the time, so this time, but perhaps perhaps we can automate these processes in the far future, but I'm skeptical whether it works, because, detecting misconceptions of students, if to get an algorithm, machine learning algorithm to do this, I think that's quite demanding.
Thank you very much for the inspirational talk.
Thank you.
Have there been attempts of replicating it at scale with large-scale experiments? Would you like to do that? And then you test for heterogeneity.
What was to replicate it with large-scale experiments?
Yes, so there were many beautiful experiments.
Yes.
And I wonder if they can be replicated with 1,000, 2,000 sample. And also, when I do similar experiments, usually for example, female students write more words compared to male. Would there be interaction effects?
Yes.
And also, do you think that AI chatbots could maybe enhance writing more by being dialogical?
The last question I didn't understand.
So if the chatbot can prompt questions, maybe it can induce people to write more.
Yes,
and it can be more of a dialogue with the chatbot.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Well, your first question is, if I were at the Max Planck Institute, I would perhaps have the resources to do replication experiments with thousands of students, but I don't have this. Usually I write a proposal to the German Science Foundation and get some money to do experiments like these, but I'm quite contented with this. I like laboratory research and I like to go do small-scale studies. I'm socialized like this, so I'm quite fine, and you can publish it too. And what was the second question? Whether
heterogeneous
effects? Yes. Female students appreciate more than males' efforts, and female students are more successful in the educational system, and they like the writing more than male students. And so the task is to bring male students to do the writing, to do more the writing and to love it more. I haven't investigated systematically, but I'm sure there are these gender issues that would be interesting for further research. And of course, I think using tools like ChatGPT to bring students in a dialogue and to get questions. This is a follow-up project which Florian, when he wants to become a postdoc, will tackle then. And hopefully we'll find more stronger effects of such prompts than now. Thank you.
Any other questions? Because it's a coffee break, I can wait just in case, and then I think that will be the last one. Do you have another one? If it's short, we can sleep there. Let people have it and move to the other break.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk and line of research. I've got a remark and a question, very short ones. The remark is, I wouldn't call it genre-free. I mean, I know what you mean. It's probably derived by the German word text lord or something like that. But if you look at the term genre more than argumentative, explanatory or something like that, then you focus on that. And this is probably knowledge transforming, and on the other side is narration probably, or describing. So that's what my remark. And the question is, did you analyze these, the texts on that focus? Because we did something similar like that in primary school, and we've seen that the students didn't explain things, but describe things. And they described things,
yes,
and not explained things, and that didn't lead to learning. The pupils learned when they explained, but not when they just described what they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if they just describe it, it is more it's producing expository text, and well, the elaboration strategies are supposed or the elaboration prompts are supposed to encourage students to engage in explanations, and producing an example to illustrate the concept is also a kind of explanation, and then trying to work out why the example fits, illustrates the concept. These are all explanatory or self-explanatory activities, generative learning activities. Yeah. And our students engaged in these activities, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to show these effects. They did it, but they need some prior knowledge. If they don't have relevant prior knowledge, they can't engage in elaboration. So you always have the journal writing works nicely when the students have already some knowledge they can use to engage in these processes. So you have to give them topics or have them journal write on topics where they can productively work with. I think that's the essence. And regarding your critique of the genre-free principle, well, I'm not a linguist. I always like linguistics and read that stuff. And communication psychology, I will think about it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So I suggest to conclude here and
yes.
Let people enjoy the coffee, and we may continue your questions and discussion with our keynote speakers. So join in